On a full moon night, Vincent hears the sound of a baby crying outside his property. When he reaches the door with his axe, he deduces that someone might be trying to rob his house. He shouts that he is a hunter, warning that the thief has chosen the wrong house to rob. As he checks the surroundings, he notices that all his traps have been disabled. Therefore, the hunter believes that the intruder is not an ordinary person, but he decides to confront them anyway. However, when he reaches the place where he heard the sounds, he finds no one. The hunter attributes this to the fact that he had recently learned that he couldn't have children. After all, these hallucinations began right after receiving that news. But then, he actually finds a baby on the ground. Vincent's wife comes to see what happened, and he explains that this is their baby. From that moment, magic started to exist. And when the baby gestured for the first time with its hands, rain began to fall, causing the dry land of the village to feel the splendor of the water. To show joy for the event, the villagers began to sing cheerful songs throughout the village. Moreover, this new being defended the village from all threats, using only its mysterious power. Although it provided great help to the village, it continued studying to contribute even more to the villagers' well-being. As a result, the people turned the powers of this being into myths and called them a wizard. After this, Vincent goes to his son, who is reading this story, and Chiron asks his father how he can use magic. Hearing this, Vincent laughs, knowing it's impossible to kill a bear with a magical arrow shot or even cut down a tree with a single axe blow. Meanwhile, two boys talk about Chiron, curious about the book he's carrying. But soon, the comments turn mean, and one of the boys claims that Chiron is adopted since he looks nothing like his father, and his biological parents surely abandoned him because he had some problem. Vincent gets angry, but Chiron remains focused on magic. To cheer up his son, Vincent tells him they will buy some fruit in town as a reward for helping him at work. When they arrive in town, the boy is dazzled by the place. Vincent asks the boy to stay at his grandfather's shop while he runs the errands. At the shop, the boy begins to help his grandfather at work, but soon gets distracted talking about magic. His grandmother, Martin, doesn't understand what he's talking about and confuses magic with Manga. Chiron corrects her and points to his magic book. Then Martin understands what her grandson is talking about, but she admits she doesn't know much about magic and suggests Chiron go next door to the bookstore to learn more. The boy heads to the store immediately, leaving Martin behind with his book. Once at the library, the owner notices Chiron touching some expensive books and tells him to step away from that shelf because those books aren't for common people. During this exchange, a noble arrives at the store and asks the librarian for the books he ordered. Chiron seizes the opportunity to sneak a peek at the books, but realizes there's nothing special in them. After leaving the shop, he decides to follow the noble to see where he will take all those books. He witnesses the noble dispatching the books. Chiron notes that his father must have gotten his book for free at this place and, remembering his social class, he complains about the difference between himself and a noble. Lost in thought, he inadvertently enters an area he shouldn't. A guard orders him to leave, as beyond those gates lies the noble district. Another guard notices the boy looks a bit suspicious. They mistake Chiron for a messenger boy for thieves and decide to take him with them, but Chiron quickly manages to escape. As he passes a specific spot, he overhears some people discussing suspicious matters and deduces that the place must be a magic school. Someone announces that they will show magic if the others can answer a question. The person then asks what the primary talent is to learn magic. Everyone gives different answers, but none are correct. The person reveals that the most important talent to learn magic is vision. The teacher gives an example. 1 + 1 = 2. However, people didn't always know the answer to this simple question, but after a group of people studied hard and managed to prove that the sum of these two numbers equals 2. With that, the teacher explains that they can solve this basic math question without using complex proofs because it is a rule that has existed for a long time, and they take it as an absolute truth. Since magic also has some pre-established rules, they must use vision to understand it better. At that moment, Chiron is left speechless. As he explains everything, the man behind the lesson notices Chiron's presence and asks him to share his opinion about what he just heard. Chiron hesitates, wondering what to do, but ultimately decides to climb the wall and join the class, feeling that if he missed this opportunity, he might never get another like it. Noticing the boy's clothes, the students realize he is a commoner and complain to the headmaster, saying he shouldn't be there among the nobles. However, the headmaster goes against the students' opinion and invites Shiren to join them. Shiren then says that he wants to see magic in person, as he has only ever seen it in books. Upon hearing this, the nobles insist that a commoner could never read a book about magic, but Shiren simply continues asking to see some magic in front of him, even if it's something simple. Then, Miri says she will show them wind magic. As she does so, everyone is lifted into the air, and Shiren becomes scared of the landing. However, the headmaster saves him before he can fall and asks what they thought of the small magic demonstration. Shiren is amazed by his first encounter with magic and asks more about it. The students around him frown at the boy, thinking his attitude is somewhat disrespectful toward the headmaster. However, Miri decides to answer the boy. He explains that magic is something far beyond common sense, as it is actually a mental action that explores the truths of a specific phenomenon. Seeing that Shiren doesn't seem to understand, the headmaster feels a bit concerned. But Shiren adds to Miri's explanation, stating that the fact that this phenomenon is unusual makes it an absolute truth. Hearing this, the headmaster asks if Shiren read that line from one of his books, but Shiren replies that only common things are in books. After all, the ideas of many great geniuses were criticized and considered unconventional, but in the end, those same ideas became recognized as a new common sense. For Shiren, he believes that the truth is hidden in what people consider ordinary. After saying this, the boy asks the headmaster how he can learn magic. Miri notices that the boy is very clever and, to illustrate his explanation, asks Shua to enter the spiritual zone. After the girl does so, Miri hides 6 coins in his hand and asks her how many coins he has. Shua gives the correct answer. The headmaster explains that when a wizard focuses, they become sensitive enough to know everything around them with precision. Moreover, Miri mentions that some wizards are capable of knowing the exact number of leaves on a distant tree, but to achieve this, the wizard must reach an extremely sensitive mental state, also known as the spiritual zone. Upon reaching this state, a wizard becomes able to control all phenomena around them. The headmaster adds that anyone can reach this state. Therefore, he suggests that Shiren practice in a quiet place until he blacks out, as reaching this level will open up a new world to him. But Shiren argues that if he can't feel anything, he won't be able to black out. Miri then invites the boy to practice right there, explaining that if he can't enter the spiritual zone, he won't be able to learn magic at all. With that, Shiren begins to focus on feeling his body in a less physical way. The headmaster asks the boy what he felt, and Shiren responds that he could hear all the sounds around him. However, the students dismiss his claim, saying that anyone could hear sounds from that distance. The headmaster concludes that Shiren doesn't have access to the spiritual zone, as expected. Still, he gently touches the boy's head and assures him that if he continues practicing, he will hear even more sounds in the future. With that, the headmaster ends the special lesson and returns to the school with his students. On the way, he laments for Shiren, thinking that if the boy had been a noble and received training from a young age, he would certainly be on par with his students. Meanwhile, Shiren decides to climb back over the wall, declaring that the training from the headmaster worked because he managed to become one with everything around him. Shiren claims to have heard a very loud sound and wonders if this is the spiritual zone. Moreover, he feels as if his body has been divided into many pieces and scattered across the world. At that moment, Shiren freezes, and as he begins to tremble in despair, he feels as though he could leave his body and become one with infinity. Running through the city, he bumps into a man, quickly apologizing for the inconvenience. Nevertheless, the man becomes irritated by Shiren's lack of awareness. Grabbing him by the shirt, the man says that when someone makes a mistake, they must compensate the person they wronged in some way. Shiren apologizes again, but the man insists that an apology isn't enough. He then asks the boy if he is part of the wolf gang that wants to kill him. Amid this confusion, a girl named Amy interrupts and asks what's going on. It's explained that the boy was possibly trying to kill the man, so he's just punishing Shiren. The boy, in turn, denies this and says he only bumped into the man. One of the men becomes enraged and attacks Shiren, accusing him of lying. The man then declares that the boy will have to compensate them by bringing them his mother. Hearing this, Shiren's eyes change completely, showing his anger at the man's last remark. The man then strikes him again, calling him arrogant. Seeing that the boy is being beaten violently, Amy commands them to stop and rushes over to check if Shiren is okay. One of the men distances himself, claiming he didn't touch the boy. Amy tells them they should stop mistreating the boy from now on, but one of the men insists he will beat the boy and sell him to a village in the south. He also says they don't need to worry about the boy's disappearance, as he's not from a noble family. Hearing this, Shiren mentally calls out to his father and mother. Amy explains to the men that if they want to sell the boy as a slave, he must not have any imperfections. She suggests they inspect Shiren to see if he's fit to be sold as a slave. Misunderstanding her, the men order the boy to remove his clothes for the inspection. However, Amy realizes they've completely misunderstood her true intention, which was only to check Shiren's face. At that moment, a fly begins buzzing near one of the men's faces. Shiren feels the spiritual zone taking over the environment around him again and recalls when the headmaster performed the wind spell. The man grabs his shirt again, threatening to hit him. But this time, Shiren sends a gust of wind at him, causing the man and his companions to fly up into the air. Shiren watches them in astonishment at what he just did, and with their fall, all the men deservedly break their bones and begin crying out for help. One of the men approaches Shiren, asking him several questions about what just happened, wondering how a boy like him could use magic without being a noble. Noticing people approaching, Amy quickly leaves the scene with impressive agility. Shiren decides to leave the tense atmosphere as well, knowing no one would want to hear him out after what he had done. He starts to realize that the world is a cold place. When he gets home, Amy is furious at having been bested by a mere kid. Meanwhile, her father notices that his daughter returned home earlier than usual and asks if she's been skipping classes again. Amy, in her arrogance, claims that she has already learned everything she needs to, so attending class is no longer useful or fun. Hearing this, Choran merely laughs at her arrogance and says that even though she's smart, she will end up in trouble if she continues behaving that way. Despite this, he notices his daughter didn't even try to argue back, leaving him somewhat confused. Amy talks to her father about magic, but he doesn't understand her intent. She asks her father to introduce her to someone who works at the Magic Academy so she can enroll there. After some time, Vincent returns home looking for his son, but his wife informs him that the boy went to collect wood in the logging area. Hearing this, he realizes it's snowing heavily and his son shouldn't be out there. So, Vincent decides to go look for the boy himself, recalling how his son had disappeared on a similar occasion in the past. At that time, Shiren had claimed he merely got lost. Meanwhile, the boy continues chopping wood and remembers the day he managed to use the Advent magic. Shiren admits he hasn't been able to trigger it again since that day, as he only managed to use it unconsciously. Although he doesn't know exactly how to wield his magic, he is still capable of entering the spiritual zone naturally. In this state of mind, the boy can sense everything around him with heightened sensitivity, from touch to shape and even smell. Using the spiritual zone, he feels the tree in front of him with greater precision. Noticing a glowing spot on the wood, he aims the axe at that specific point and strikes it. With this single blow, he is able to fell the tree in one go. From a distance, Vincent observes his son and is amazed to see the boy using the thunder strike to bring down the tree more easily. Shiren, on the other hand, says this is the first time he's managed to pull off the thunder strike, just like the magic he used that day. With that, he understands that he needs to seek more knowledge if he is to master these techniques without relying solely on luck. 3 years after that day, he continued training until he could perform the thunder strike at will. He then realizes that he's been in the spiritual zone for 5 hours. Thus, Shiren feels as if his body has become one with nature. Even though he's been in this state for 5 hours, he still feels it's not enough to fully experience all the stimuli of nature. Shiren recalls a conversation he had with the headmaster of the Magic Academy, where he said that entering the spiritual zone is like stepping into a new world. Reflecting on this description, Chiron now confirms that it makes perfect sense, as the phrase different world truly describes the feeling of being in the spiritual zone. After this, he decides to gather his belongings and return home. Upon arriving, he notices a few white horses and a carriage at his door and deduces that they have visitors. When he enters the house, his father tells him to greet the visitor, who turns out to be the head butler of the house. The man introduces himself to the boy as Timorin and explains that he is there specifically to see Chiron. Hearing this, the boy remembers that his family is of the kingdom's second noble class, which makes it strange that they are seeking him. Timorin approaches him and asks if he knows how to read. Chiron explains that he has been reading since he was young. The butler then proceeds to search him. Chiron, confused, asks what he's doing, and Timorin says that Chiron has a good reputation and knows how to read, even though he is the son of a simple woodcutter. After this, Timorin invites the boy to work at the house, and the job involves removing books from the large library in the estate. Since there are thousands of books to be moved, Timorin explains that the job will take about 2 years. While others will assist in the task, the division will still be managed by the two of them. Hearing this, Chiron deduces that these books must contain the knowledge he needs to become a wizard. However, Timorin clarifies that only the boy and his family will know about this job. If any of these books leak out, Chiron and his family will be killed. Chiron now understands why his parents seem worried about something. Despite Timorin's stern warning, he reassures that the boy will be well compensated with a significant amount of money to account for the danger to his and his family's lives. Moreover, he guarantees that they will receive more money than they could ever earn by hunting. Vincent is offended and asserts that he isn't considering Timorin's offer solely for the money. He's also thinking about his son's future and the opportunity for Chiron to achieve his dreams. Hearing this, Timorin laughs at the boy's father, stating that Chiron doesn't stand a chance at having a successful career in anything. He continues by accusing Vincent of only accepting the deal for financial reasons. Otherwise, he wouldn't allow his son to be used for this job. Vincent responds that he only agreed to the job because the butler promised that Chiron would have the opportunity to read the magic books. Timorin confirms that he did indeed say that, but he adds that, even though the boy can read the books, he won't be able to monitor him all the time. Vincent then recalls seeing his son reading a book as a child, after his mother had taught him a few words as a whim. At the age of 6, the boy began reading books and learning things on his own, without the help of Olena. Realizing this, they started to suspect that Chiron might be the child of some noble. Vincent starts to feel guilty, thinking that if the boy had been raised by a noble family, he would have gone to school and had a much better future. But soon, snapping back to reality, he affirms that Chiron is his son. Vincent explains that the son of a woodcutter must learn to work in the mountains. However, when Chiron followed this natural law, he became very scared. Remembering the first time he saw Timorin, Vincent had decided to offer his son to help with his work, thinking that since the boy could read from a young age, he could assist Timorin. But returning to the present, Vincent expresses regret for begging Timorin to give his son this job, as things didn't turn out the way he had imagined. After saying this, he orders the butler to leave his house immediately. Noticing the rising tension, Chiron takes action and decides to accept the nobleman's job. Timorin reaffirms his previous warning, ensuring that the boy will be killed if any rumor about the job spreads. But Chiron insists, promising that he will never let anything leak. Moreover, Chiron states that he will bear no resentment towards Timorin if things go wrong. The noble informs them that he will return in a week, giving the boy time to think it over. However, Timorin makes it clear that once Chiron enters the mansion, he won't be able to leave until the job is done. After this, the noble departs. This prompts Vincent to complain to his son, asking why he accepted the job. He's willing to take full responsibility for Chiron if he refuses the job, but the boy looks at him with a smile and thanks him for giving him this gift. In response, Vincent embraces his son and promises to protect him at all costs. A week passes, and as promised, Timorin returns to the house with a contract. Chiron's entire family signs the document. Then, the boy is taken to the mansion, and along the way, he imagines his parents worried about him. Chiron tries to reach out to them with his hand, but to no avail. However, he reassures himself that this job is an excellent opportunity for his life, even though he will be surrounded by people of great power and influence. He questions whether he will truly be able to survive the next 2 years. On the way, the boy is informed that the Int House is located in the city of Cryas, in the kingdom of Toria. Additionally, the noble explains that this family consists of warriors responsible for training official fencers and mentions that their former leader was a third-class official knight. The current leader of the family, however, is a fourth-class official knight named Bishop. To conclude, the noble states that the Int family controls all the forces in the city. As they pass by a famous Int family attraction called the Great Corridor, Shiren is left in awe. The noble then remarks that there are many things for him to be impressed by. When they reach the office where Shiren will be staying, Timur asks the boy to continue following him, as he will explain the tasks he needs to do. Upon entering the new room, Shiren is amazed to discover that it is the Grand Library of the Zens. Timur informs him that these books will be moved to a new library, and Shiren's task will be to organize them. Every week, he will receive a new list detailing which books to pick. Moreover, Timur adds that he cannot leave the premises after work hours and can only enter the mansion with special permission. After hearing all the rules, Shiren insists on continuing with the job. The noble then informs him that he will start working the next day. Once at work, Shiren realizes that it makes sense for someone to be responsible for organizing the library, as maintaining consistency is key. He gives the example of a book titled The History of Swords, which could fit both in the history category and in the category of professional fencing theory. With this realization, he notices something about his organization studies. There seems to be a single thread connecting all knowledge, and that thread is history. After all, learning history and using it to reinforce other areas makes learning more effective. Among the 10,000 books, Shiren notes that there are around 850 history books. He decides to read all of them during the 2 years he will spend in the mansion. Hearing a noise, he covers up by explaining that he needs official permission to read the books. Timur notices the boy working after hours again and begins to suspect him, advising him not to jeopardize his privileged position too soon. After all, the boy will have to take responsibility if he does something forbidden. Shiren reassures him that he won't do anything wrong. The noble stops in front of him, and Shiren immediately thinks he has been caught reading the books, but instead, Timur warns him to take care of his uniform. Since both the head of the family and the young masters frequent the library, as an employee of the Int family, Shiren is obliged not to cause embarrassment. Additionally, the noble tells him to fix his hair. Relieved that these were the only issues, Shiren continues his studies at night and realizes that studying the entire local history won't be easy. However, he remains determined, explaining that to access learned knowledge, one must clearly understand each event. In the middle of his studies, he falls asleep. Timur catches him reading, but since the boy isn't reading practical books, he decides not to take any action. After 3 months, Shiren gradually adjusts to the job. One day, he notices that a young master took a book and didn't return it. He worries he'll have problems if the book is missing, but Momo reassures him that the young masters are responsible for returning books themselves. However, Momo adds that the nobles don't care whether books go missing, as the responsibility will always fall on the butlers. This brings some relief to Shiren since there likely aren't any important books in the library. Still, Shiren worries about his safety, as commoners like him can be killed for very trivial reasons. He also remarks that even servants can become cold and heartless to prevent the smallest mistakes from happening. Suddenly, Lord Ryan Int's youngest son runs into the library, complaining that he can't rest. He is being chased by an older man. Ryan begs Shiren not to say he's there. When the man finally arrives at the library, Shiren asks who he is. The man introduces himself as a fencing instructor and demands that Shiren reveal Ryan's location unless he wants a beating. Threatened, Shiren immediately gives up Ryan's location. The boy tries to explain to his master that it was all a misunderstanding, but the master simply grabs him by the leg and drags him back to training. On the way, Ryan vows revenge on Shiren for ratting him out, while Shiren believes he did the right thing by telling the truth. After all, the instructor outranks the head of the family, so it was his only choice. Ryan is taken to the mountains, where he spends a month, and when he tells Shiren about it, he mentions that it took him 20 days to fully read his first book. However, After thoroughly understanding the first one, he managed to read a total of 82 books in the brief span of 4 months. Chiron realizes that the beginning of studying was indeed the hardest part. After absorbing the knowledge from one book, the next books referenced information he had already encountered. Thus, Chiron deduces that after reading 200 books, the remaining 650 should be much easier. But during his studies, Chiron begins to have doubts and questions the true importance of studying history right now. However, upon learning about the activities of mages from the past, he becomes convinced that his decision was correct. Chiron explains that if a scholar develops a theory, it must be validated in reality by a mage. And while mages and scholars are alike, not all scholars are mages. After all, they cannot enter the highly sensitive state of mind known as the spiritual zone. Chiron realizes that if he strengthens his knowledge, he might even become a true mage. During his reflections, Ryan interrupts him. Ryan claims that he went through hell, all because of Chiron. But Chiron dismisses the situation and asks if Ryan is really there because of what happened that day. Ryan confirms this and explains that he had to sacrifice a lot during his training, as his master made him climb a mountain countless times during that period. Whenever he thought about giving up and falling to his death, he remembered his revenge, which gave him the strength to continue. Chiron notices that Ryan is far angrier than he initially thought, to the point of losing control entirely. Ryan recalls that he trusted Chiron to hide him, but instead, Chiron cowardly turned him over to his master. To Ryan, this is an act of utter disgust. Chiron retorts that he didn't betray anyone. He simply told the truth. Ryan responds that at the very least, Chiron should have warned him that he wouldn't help. Chiron realizes he can't use logic against the noble and simply asks what Ryan wants to do now. Ryan, noticing that despite Chiron having started working for his family recently, the boy remains unusually calm, accuses Chiron of underestimating him. To settle this, Ryan asks Chiron to follow him. They arrive at the training grounds, and Chiron suggests that Ryan might want to beat him until he feels better. Chiron decides to accept this aggression, thinking it's better than being killed. But instead, Ryan hands him a wooden sword and challenges him to a duel. Ryan makes it clear that he's not as cowardly as Chiron, and because Chiron underestimated an aspiring swordsman, he will now face his blows. Chiron asks why Ryan thinks he's a coward, and the noble replies that as a servant of the house, Chiron should have protected him, but instead, Chiron handed him over to his master out of fear of being beaten. Ryan then orders Chiron to attack, offering to let him strike 3 times first. After all, the size difference between them is significant, and Chiron notices the challenge in Ryan's eyes. Concerned, Chiron realizes that if he breaks a bone, he'll have to return home. He decides to make the most of his 3 chances. By the second strike, Ryan realizes that Chiron has never wielded a sword before. Chiron, in turn, decides to use the spiritual zone for his final attack. When his wooden sword strikes Ryan's, it breaks. And, after doing this, Chiron realizes that his intuition was indeed correct, as he used the first 2 strikes only to study his opponent. As for the third attack, he used the Thunder Strike, which he had been studying for many years. Ryan is surprised by the boy's skill and asks where he learned fencing. Chiron then corrects him, saying that it is actually a Thunder Strike. Upon hearing this, Ryan remains confused, and Chiron explains that he used to go to the mountains with his father to chop wood. And since his physical strength wasn't enough to cut the trees, he had to develop this skill to make up for his lack of physical power. At this, Ryan is skeptical because, to him, it doesn't make sense that the boy learned such a technique just by cutting wood, especially since Ryan has been training in fencing for more than 15 years. Thus, he assures Chiron that he couldn't have developed that ability simply by chopping wood. At that moment, he remembers his brother, Rai, and the day when the boy had learned the secret technique of the Zint and how Rai's skills had already surpassed his own. The boy's father declared he had nothing left to teach him. With that, he decided to prepare a dinner to celebrate Rai's victory. On the other side, Ryan sees all this while lying defeated on the ground. He grows angry because he can never beat his brother, no matter how much he tries. Back in the present, Ryan remains frustrated and says he cannot accept such an insult. Chiron tries to calm him down, but Ryan orders him to shut up and hands him a real sword. Ryan then claims that he will treat Shiren well if he proves capable of learning the sword-crushing technique. With that said, he explains that they will fight on the battlefield in a month, but this time using real swords. Upon hearing this, Shiren begins to worry. After all, he might end up getting killed, and he asks Ryan to reconsider his decision, reminding him that he has never taken fencing lessons. Ryan reminds him that he has a month to learn the sword-crushing technique and that, in Ryan's opinion, the boy has the potential to achieve it. Therefore, he orders Shiren not to run from this new responsibility, or else he will track him down wherever he may be. The next day, at work, Shiren laments and realizes that he can't trust people with black and blue hair too much. During his shift, he remembers that the head of the family has 3 sons and 1 daughter. The eldest son is a 6th grade official swordsman with black hair. His daughter, who also has blue hair, showed immense talent in fencing but decided to pursue a career as a pianist instead of becoming a swordswoman. As for the second son, Rogent, he is often called a genius by everyone around him and also has black hair. Finally, there's Ryan, the least talented son in the family, who, despite the help of a dedicated teacher, never improved. After recalling all this, Shiren realizes that he was wrong not to let Ryan win. After all, Ryan has a deeply wounded ego, having spent his whole life being compared to his brother. Shiren then begins to think about how he can avoid dying, as his parents would also suffer the consequences. He decides to set this issue aside and turn his attention to his studies of magic. After all, if he can learn some defensive art, at least he might survive the fencing duel. Meanwhile, Ryan continues with his daily runs. The master notices that, for some reason, Ryan has broken his record, but Ryan brushes off the training, saying it's useless. This irritates Ryan, and he claims that he's still standing after the training, so he asks the teacher for something more difficult. Upon hearing this, the master is sure that something has happened to Ryan for him to be so disciplined, but Ryan assures him that everything is fine. However, the master remains unconvinced and tells Ryan that Rai has learned something new. Thinking about this, the master remembers that Rai has already awakened his Zima. Meanwhile, Shiren is studying the concept of Zima, which is explained as a kind of imaginary body. It's somewhat similar to the spiritual zone of mages, but Zima is meant for swordsmen. He explains that all humans possess an image of their own body, but Zima elevates this concept to the highest level. After all, masters of Zima have complete understanding of their body, even to the point of controlling the movement of their cells. After reading the full context behind this technique, Shiren realizes that Zima is the exact opposite of the spiritual zone. Still, he decides to try using it. He begins to focus all his attention on himself and soon sees the results of the first stage. It's as if he's entering the spiritual zone, and from that moment on, he only needs to erase himself to reach the spiritual zone. But to achieve Zima, he must delve even deeper into his own existence. In the middle of the process, Shiren realizes that accessing Zima will be inefficient. After all, it would be easier for him to focus his training on fencing, using only the spiritual zone. With that, he begins his training, and against Ryan, he trains violently, wondering why he's unable to use Zima. This troubles him, and he notices that Ryan has gone too far that day, ordering him to stop the training for now. Afterward, the two sit down, and Shiren asks Ryan if he knows what his strengths are. Ryan replies that he doesn't because he only knows his flaws. Upon hearing this, Shiren tells him that this kind of thinking distances him from being a genius, as true geniuses know their strengths and use them to their advantage to evolve. After all, geniuses never work on something they know they won't improve at. Ryan, hearing this, says he will continue to follow his motto of training until death, believing that's how he'll reach his goals. Meanwhile, Shiren continues studying fencing, stating that besides being useful for killing enemies, it also works on the swordsman's mindset. After all, fencing teaches that there are only 8 ways to attack an enemy. Furthermore, Shiren is firm in saying that he is trained to block attacks from all 8 directions. During his training, he realizes that the world of swords is as dense as the world of magic. Shiren apologizes to his parents, acknowledging that he might not be able to return home. Still, he states that he will have no regrets about his choices because, even if he dies, Shiren was able to witness an incredible world and shares this with Ryan. He deduces that Ryan might be as talented as his brother, Rai, and if that's true, he declares that he will do everything to defeat him. As he charges toward the boy, Shiren, for his part, notices that Ryan is using an incredible and entirely different form of fencing from his own, yet he is still able to feel the path of the sword. At that moment, Ryan notices that the boy is not only dodging his attacks but also staring at his sword, showing no fear at all. Yiren states that he is not capable of eliminating his fear of death, but he understands that this fear is focused on the future, which, in turn, is just an illusion of something that doesn't exist yet. Taking this into consideration, Shiren explains that if people didn't think about the future consequences of their actions, anyone would be capable of jumping off a cliff. Ryan then realizes that the boy has apparently learned to suppress all of his emotions. However, he claims that he also has no fear of dying. The two go back to their attacks, and Shiren quickly manages to block Ryan's strikes. But suddenly, Ryan's attacks become heavier, and Shiren notices that the speed of Ryan's strikes is exceeding the limit that he can perceive through synesthesia. Ryan prepares another attack, and Shiren realizes that he's about to lose the fight. Seeing him in this state, Ryan detects the fear in the boy's eyes. He starts to feel more powerful and claims that this is the acclaimed fencing of the O family. Therefore, it's impossible for Shiren to withstand his attacks, as Ryan is using all his strength in each one. With that, he promises to crush the boy once and for all. In the middle of the duel, Shiren notices something strange. After attacking his abdomen, if Ryan had aimed a little higher, he could have sliced his side, ending the fight instantly. But instead, Ryan keeps focusing his strikes only on strong attacks. Reflecting on this, Shiren understands that Ryan actually knows less about fencing than he thought, and even though his skills are good, Ryan won't get far with such a superficial understanding of fencing. With this in mind, Shiren decides to use this flaw in Ryan's technique to his advantage. He changes his strategy, switching from defense to offense. Seeing this sudden shift in the boy, Ryan is astonished. To him, the boy should be too exhausted to even react. Yet, when attacked with basic strikes, Ryan realizes he's struggling to block them. But remembering his brother's mocking smile, he becomes enraged and claims that he will become the best swordsman in the world. With that said, he goes back to attacking the boy with his sword, and Shiren notices that Ryan is attacking with brute force alone, failing to understand why he's not using his fencing skills to win easily at that moment. Seeing this thoughtless behavior, Shiren says he doesn't understand what Ryan is doing, and while observing the sword's trajectory, he realizes he can't read it anymore. There are too many variables, and so the boy charges at him, but Shiren manages to see something as he advances. After the clash of their swords, one flies off into the distance. Shiren still holds his sword, and Ryan starts to mentally question if this is even possible, for in the last moment, Shiren changed his posture and struck upward, causing Ryan's sword to fly away. Ryan asks what the boy is. Shiren thinks that he never imagined he could defeat his opponent. Nevertheless, he remains curious about what will happen next. After all, even though this was a duel between the two of them, Ryan is still a noble, and since Shiren has once again wounded his pride, there's no telling what Ryan might do to him. But instead of waiting, Ryan simply accepts his defeat and says Shiren can kill him if he wants, as he was the victor of the duel. Hearing this, Shiren becomes furious and explains that if he were to kill Ryan, he would certainly be killed right after. Shiren states that this declaration is quite ridiculous and senseless, but Ryan explains that they were fighting with their lives at stake, and as the loser, he should be killed. However, Shiren makes it clear that only Ryan was wagering his life, as Shiren was only focused on surviving. Therefore, he affirms that this duel was meaningless from the beginning. With that said, Shiren remembers the time he handed Ryan over to his master and asks why Ryan blamed him for merely saying where he was. Ryan says he was only angry because Shiren acted dishonorably. After all, he wanted Shiren to help him in that situation. Listening to Shiren, Ryan becomes irritated and states that Shiren put him in a very uncomfortable position, one in which he had no idea what to do. Furthermore, Shiren claims that this is the kind of behavior that would make someone dishonorable. After all, if Ryan truly had honor, he would have faced his master's training with his head held high. After saying this, the boy suddenly realizes he was close to death just a few minutes ago. When Ryan sees him in this state, he finds it strange. After all that bravery worthy of a cold-blooded warrior has disappeared, leaving only a seemingly defenseless and tearful boy. Ryan then acknowledges that the boy is indeed a genius, but unlike his brother Rai, Shiren doesn't mock him. He realizes that instead of acting with disdain, the boy faced him with all his strength and with his head held high. Ryan then asks the boy's name, and he introduces himself as Shiren Aaron. Ryan introduces himself, stating his full name. Shiren notices that something strange is going on. After all, a noble doesn't just say his full name to anyone. Ryan extends his hand to Shiren and asks if they can be friends from now on. After a year of hard work, Shiren receives praise for his performance, and out of the 850 history books he was tasked to read, only 200 remain. Since Shiren is reading an average of 3 books a day, he feels close to completing the core knowledge he has longed for. Additionally, he has also been experiencing fencing, and during his training, the boy gradually understands the true essence behind fear, thus extending the durability of his spiritual zone. Taking all this experience into account, Shiren feels that, at some point, he will reach his true goal, even though the beginning of this journey is very slow. For him, the best thing that happened along the way was that Shiren gained a friend. In this case, Ryan, who, in turn, is amazed at how many books there are in the library. Shiren explains that the patriarch, the second young master, frequently visits the library, so they must have as many books as possible. Seeing this, Ryan feels envious and says that being smart must be really cool. As for Shiren, he notices that after spending a bit more time with Ryan, the young noble shows himself to be a very kind person with good traits. And Shiren says it's because he's the youngest son. After all, Ryan has very reckless habits, such as throwing books on the floor. So, he asks Ryan to stop doing that, otherwise, it will be his head that will roll on the floor. However, Ryan insists that no one will do anything to Shiren. After all, a book is not more valuable than a life, and besides, Ryan guarantees that he will protect Shiren even if he burned down the entire library. So, there's nothing to worry about. But Shiren says it would be safer if Ryan didn't do those things. With that said, he decides to change the subject and asks more about his training, explaining that he only did the basics and told his master that he would use the remaining time to study a bit in the library. Seeing this, Shiren tells him to start his studies immediately, as he's stalling more than doing anything. Ryan replies that studying is very boring because it makes him feel bored. Shiren reminds him that he's there precisely to study, so he must fulfill his goal. Ryan then asks if the boy really needs to read so many books to become a mage, and Shiren says yes, adding that, in fact, he's very behind. After all, he didn't have access to books before working for the family. But now he has read more than 600 history books, and Shiren knows a lot now. Remembering the boy's discipline in his studies, Ryan is amazed at how quickly Shiren is able to read books. Moreover, Ryan notices that even though they are the same age, Shiren seems much more mature than him. Shiren read a book where the author seeks to determine who would win in a conflict between a mage and a swordsman. While reading the book, Ryan interrupts to complain, saying it's very boring. Seeing this, Shiren gets annoyed, as he was really enjoying the book's narrative. Ryan claims the book is not fun at all because it doesn't have pictures and isn't about fencing. But Shiren says he needs to read the book before saying it's boring. With that, he continues with the story. Then Rai approaches the two and says that in this dispute between the swordsman and the mage, the swordsman would obviously win. Ryan asks his brother how he's so sure of that answer, while Shiren becomes concerned about Rai, as there's no way to know how much he overheard from their conversation. Speaking so lightly to the young master could be problematic. Ryan asks again how his brother is so certain that the swordsman would defeat the mage. Ryan assumes Rai is only favoring the swordsman because he has won. But Rai explains that to easily reach that conclusion, they just need to look at the rankings of mages and swordsmen on the continent. Ryan counters by saying that their rankings don't matter during the fight, and seeing this, Rai turns to Shiren, who grows even more tense and uncomfortable with the conversation. However, he makes an effort and explains that if the mage and the swordsman are on the same level, the swordsman will have a hard time winning, especially once the mage enters his spiritual zone. At this point, Rai corrects him, saying the mage will still lose. After all, There's an artifact called the Five Gods Armor Set, also known as anti-magic, which has the power to interfere with a mage's spiritual zone. More is then explained about the spiritual zone, saying that fighting a mage within it is like trying to escape sharks in the open sea. However, it's possible to disturb the water of that ocean and throw off the shark's senses, which in this case would be the mage. To do this, one needs to use the anti-magic artifact, because if the mage's enemy is wearing this armor, the mage is unable to touch him, even with his spiritual zone activated. As Rai talks more about anti-magic, he explains that it's a precious ability created by mana flowing inside a dragon's heart, and because of that, the price of this armor would be enormous. Each piece of it costs as much as the annual budget of an entire kingdom. Hearing this, Ryan claims that the mage remains stronger than a swordsman because no one would have enough money to buy armor like that. Rai counters, saying that the creators of anti-magic are the mages themselves. After all, there's a big demand in this market, which would surely make them good money. With that, Rai claims that swordsmen are much stronger, as mages sell the weakness of their own kind just for money. Shiren then asserts that this is the true essence of a mage. After all, they created anti-magic to limit magical activities in areas where magic is forbidden. Additionally, anti-magic is also used as training support in magic academies. Even though this power can be used against mages, it's still valued as a product of the mage's own intelligence. With that said, Shiren concludes that swordsmen cannot be defined as stronger just by taking this factor into account. Hearing this, Ryan discreetly laughs at his brother. Rai explains that the reality and ideals of each group are different. Besides, to him, a mage still cannot win a fight against a swordsman. After Rai leaves, Ryan gets excited and tells Shiren he's never seen his brother look like that. 6 months after this incident, Shiren was about to finish his work for the family. One of the employees comments to Tim Moreo that Shiren is excellent at working in the library, so they should find a way to keep him working at the mansion for longer. Hearing this, Tim Moreo tells them to stop talking nonsense. Meanwhile, Shiren continues his work until Ryan approaches and congratulates him for completing his task with the same mastery as always. Then, Shiren asks to visit his house before leaving. Ryan gets emotional, realizing that Shiren had been hiding their friendship for a long time. As he realizes they only see each other in the library, Shiren becomes curious about what his friend's home is like. They arrive at Ryan's house, and he tells the boy to relax, as his family won't be back until later. When Shiren enters Ryan's room, he notices that the place is very small, located at the end of the hallway, and it looks more like a simple training field. They take a break to play cards, and after losing several times in a row, Ryan blames his defeat on Shiren, saying the boy is surpassing his spiritual zone. But Shiren assures him he's not doing anything wrong and even describes some standard gestures Ryan uses. Therefore, it's easy to defeat him once you figure out how his strategies work, as when you predict the enemy's intentions, you can make a more accurate move. With this, Ryan starts focusing on analyzing the game as a whole. Then, Shiren reveals that by using this technique, he was able to access the spiritual zone much more easily. During their conversation, Ryan falls asleep, and then Shiren hears the sound of a piano. Shiren quickly deduces that it must be Reina, as she is the only one in the family capable of playing the piano. He goes to listen to her, and she asks him what he thinks of her sonata. He realizes that she has already noticed him, and Shiren tells her that she plays very well. Then, Reina notices that it's the first time the two have seen each other. He informs her that he was hired by the family to organize the library. She recognizes him as the boy from the rumors and, in the middle of the conversation, asks if he's ever played the piano before. He says no and feels nervous about continuing the conversation with the girl, as, according to Ryan's reports, the person with the worst personality in the mansion is Reina herself. Despite this, the girl offers to teach him piano and asks him to sit by her side. He becomes quite nervous, but when she insists, saying that no one will punish him since she allowed it, Shiren thinks that she's being persistent and he's in no position to refuse. Besides, he wonders when he'll have another chance to sit next to a girl. Then, she starts teaching him the musical notes and the symbols in the sheet music, asking him to play 3 notes at the same time. He manages to play one. He is amazed by the sound that comes out, and she encourages him to keep going. He gets a bit ambitious and asks if he can try playing on his own, and she agrees, though she wonders if he knows more chords than she taught him. Shiren begins playing, but everything is completely wrong. Still, he doesn't hesitate as he plays. If you like this video, please subscribe, leave a like and comment for the next part.